Greetings, brethren, once again, and welcome to our continued discussion on the storehouse, headquarters, leadership issues. In this particular presentation, we will be looking at corrupt Davidian leadership hierarchies. Where do they come from? And what makes them corrupt? And if this is the case, is there a remedy? Well, thanks be to God that there is. So please join us in our presentation today. Grab your pen and paper as we probe into the following questions. For example, since the death of Brother Houteff in 1955, a multitude of groups and factions have arisen. How can we understand this development? If we analyze what has gone wrong in the past, can we then determine a better way to manage the work and progress forward? Well, certainly, I hope so, and we'll make that clear. Does the original Shepherd's Rod message say that Davidians are to follow another prophet or porter or GAD-SDA after 1955? Well, if it does, we certainly should know. If not, we should have a clear understanding of what it is that God would have us to do today to advance this message. What is the most essential element one needs to advance the Shepherd's Rod message today? Think about this as we ponder the course that God would have us to take. What are the qualifications to be a leader in Christ rather than a follower of the arm of flesh? If you don't think this is a problem today, it's time to more carefully search our history and come to understand what's going on in our midst. So for analysis today, we will look at 4 hierarchical types of leadership amongst Davidian groups. They are familial hierarchies. The next will be totalitarian hierarchies. The next will be Saul-like hierarchies, and finally, independent hierarchies. We're going to compare the unique characteristics of each and also a lot of characteristics, how they overlap. So let us dig in and find out what these things are all about. Familial hierarchies are characterized by, first, a single leader arises either through usurpation or self-appointment. The leadership hierarchy stays within an inherited family line, like father to wife, or husband to wife to son, and so forth. 3, the movement can end abruptly when the leader either dies or apostatizes, and then after that, usually the group splinters into many factions. Usually the leader will acquire a title to elevate their status, such as prophet or porter. And number 5, leaders may surround themselves with a band of loyalists or supporters to keep them in their position. So what are some examples of this that we've seen since the death of Brother Houteff in 1955? Well, one of the most prominent examples is that of Ben Roden's branch. Roden was one of the first usurpers to arise after Brother Houteff died and claim the title of Elijah the prophet, who would never die. But later, in 1978, Roden died, and so the office of prophet was transferred to the wife, Lois. Then Lois got older and eventually died, and the son, George, was the likely heir, but he became a homicidal maniac that murdered another man with an axe, and so he was institutionalized. And this allowed Vernon Howell, who later became David Koresh, to take over the movement. However, there was no clear hierarchy in terms of another family member, so this movement broke into a number of splinters or factions, and today we have at least 6 different people heading up different factions of branch Davidians, each one disagreeing with each other. Another example is Bingham's Bashan Hill. M.J. Bingham started the Bashan movement in 1962, claiming the title of Porter, president, who is to bind up the testimonies. And after he died, the office transferred to his second adulterous wife, Jimmy Bingham, who kept the title until she died recently, a couple years ago, and then the office of Porter and president has transferred to the son, Trevor Bingham, who's attempting to keep the movement together today. So these are examples of familial hierarchies. They have a close relation to totalitarian hierarchies, which we will address next. These are characterized by a single leader that arises through usurpation or self-appointment. The movement can end abruptly when the leader dies or apostatizes, and they splinter into many factions. So we're going to see this as a general trend. Controlling power over a group, once it loses power or falls away, the followers usually are thrown into disarray, and the movement scatters. They also may acquire a title to elevate their status. In this case, maybe a title such as Vice President, or King David, or the One Shepherd. They usually surround themselves with a pseudo-council of officers. So they might appear to be following the Leviticus, but they really have these loyalists to support them in their position. So what are some examples? Salem Association under Don Adair. Now, Salem was a storehouse from 1970 to 1974, but Don Adair was voted in by his supporters in 1974 and took over the office of vice president and has remained in that position ever since. Total control, and their council is really comprised of two individuals, him and his wife, and they maintain, they call it the resident council, and everything goes according to what Don Adair says, his way or the highway. Another example is the international GADSDA, started by Wanda Berry, who broke off with her supporters from the UKIP Association in 1983. And it turns out it's much like Salem, and it turns out Wanda Berry was married to Don Adair at one point, so they have a lot of characteristics. And that association, it's out in California, has been under her control ever since, up to this day, and she has 2 or 3 loyalists around to support or prop her up. So the question becomes, what happens when these people die? Predictably, their movements will splinter in faction because they, as control freaks, they don't train up people to be leaders. They only accept tithe from followers. So once the movement breaks apart, then the followers are without totalitarian leadership, without chart or compass, and they scatter about. Another example more recently is the Davidian SDA Association that was started up by Lennox Sim, who claims the title of antitypical King David, the One Shepherd, and he's supported by loyalists, mainly in a group in Africa. And they believe that he'll never die. Well, what happens when he dies? Well, predictably, his movement will fracture and scatter because they lean on the arm of flesh rather than trusting in the voice of the Lord through the original shepherd's rod. And another example is the layman movements over in the Philippines, led by Ariel Dakatanan, who claims to be Elijah the Tishbite, a prophet and a president. And once again, his movement is all dictated and determined by his rule. So these totalitarians really rule like dictators. The next hierarchy is the Saul-like hierarchy. By Saul-like, we mean a like Saul. And they adopt a pseudo or a fake Levitical organizational structure. So they claim to follow Leviticus, but they don't have president. They end up having a vice president and man-appointed councils. So they nominate and vote for officers of their executive council, just like the General Conference, following the pattern of Saul. There's usually a primary thinker or leader that is surrounded by a cadre of lieutenants, and the visible leader, a vice president, is usually comprised of a rotating list of loyalist lieutenants. So some examples: the GADSDA, Mountaindale. There are basically 2 or 3 people that do all the thinking there, and they have sessions. but their leaders and their vice president is usually a rotation between 3 or 4 individuals. So very little new blood brought in or people trained up to be leaders. It's just the same core group of people. Similar at GADSTA Waco. Their principal thought leader is Norman Archer, has ever been since they started and broke away from Mount Dale in 1991. And so their VPs tend to be 3 or 4 people like Melvin Wallace, Miguel Martin, DeCarries, that are all loyalists to Archer. When you go to their legal documents, their incorporation papers with the state of Texas, their president is listed as none other than Norman Archer, who later changed it to vice president because it contradicted their bylaws. But nonetheless, the head, the one that rules it legally, is Norman Archer. Another group, Universal Publishing Association, Plantation, Florida, broke away from Waco, and it's led by Eric Bell and some associates around here. So these hierarchies are Saul-like because they follow the world, just like the General Conference, and they're exposed by the shepherd's rod. In this reference 8-track, page 48, it reads, "Time has already demonstrated that the Seventh-day Adventist organization is fulfilling the type, preferring to incorporate and to elect officers by the people's vote. They have thereby manifested that they have cared not so much to please God by being a peculiar people, as he would have them to be, as they have to please themselves by being as much as possible like the other denominations, just as in Saul's time the people wanted to be like the nations around about them. And, although chosen by the people, yet the General Conference officers were nevertheless accepted by God to be the rulers over his people, now, as Saul was anciently. Just as he betrayed his trust, however, by disobeying the word of God as spoken to him by the prophet Samuel, so the present church organization, the ancient men before the house, have, says the prophet to the church today, betrayed their trust. Testimonies, Volume 5, page 211. For a more ample treatment of the subject of organization, see our organizational manual, which of course is the Leviticus. So we see this exact same pattern happening in the GADSTAs, Mount Dale and Waco in particular. They incorporate with the state as IRS 501c3, and then they elect officers by the people's vote, just like the General Conference. So they're fulfilling the antitype, and just as they have disobeyed the word of God, these ancient men have betrayed their trust, and unless they change their ways, they will be removed in the same way. Why is it that they're corrupted? Well, they want to control the work. Ellen White says in Testimonies to Ministers, page 300, "Let me tell you that the Lord will work in this last work in a manner very much out of the common order of things, and in a way that will be contrary to any human planning. There will be those among us who will always want to control the work of God, to dictate even which movements shall be made when the work goes forward under the direction of the angel who joins the third angel in the message to be given to the world. God will use ways and means by which it will be seen that he is taking the reins in his own hands. The workers will be surprised by the simple means that he will use to bring about and perfect his work of righteousness." So these councils that are elected by popular vote try to rule the entire world field out of Waco, Texas, or Mount Dale, New York. And we have 2 examples to illustrate this. One of them in the middle 1990s, the internet was just coming onto the scene. And there was a couple, Darren and Michael Dietz, who were members of Mountaindale, that had the vision to get the shepherd's rod onto the internet. But it turns out that the leadership of Mountaindale at the time opposed the idea. They were more worried about black helicopters and government conspiracies than advancing the shepherd's rod. So this couple, the Dietzes, took it upon their own to develop and set up a website and get the shepherd's rod onto the internet. And lo and behold, after they did it, then everybody come running and asking him, "Oh, wow, show us how to do it." Norman Archer showed up at their doorstep and begged them, "Oh, tell us how you did it." So they were envious and jealous. And of course, look at today. Everybody's got a website. That's just one illustration. So two individuals separated and did it on their own. They didn't ask permission. And in our own experience, we found the same thing. When we were in the Philippines in the mid-2000s, one of the most pressing needs we saw was that the territories was completely deprived of shepherd's rod literature. A very little, if any, ever got there, and it was just a handful of pieces. There were some groups with many members that all they had for reading was one of the large compiled books published by Donna Dare in Salem. They had no individual tract literature for their own reading. So this appalling situation, we saw the absolute necessity of the logic of publishing the shepherd's rod there in the Philippines. And when we approached Mountaindale with it, they opposed it. They put it down. They weren't in agreement. So out of necessity, we had to establish upa7.org to meet that pressing need, not only in the Philippines, but worldwide. We needed literature. And furthermore, the literature that Mountaindale was publishing at that time had been completely tampered and altered. It was no longer original. Artwork changed, typesetting changed. So there was an absolute necessity to restore the original shepherd's rod. As it turns out, these associations are opposed to the idea of having storehouses around the world to meet and reach the 20+ million Seventh-day Adventists worldwide. It's completely absurd. And the reason is they're totalitarian in nature. They want to rule and control the work. And this is abhorrent in the sight of God. Consider this statement, that some seek to rule over God's heritage. This is a big problem in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Ellen White's day. For example, this statement, Manuscript Releases, Volume 17, page 196. It reads, "All secret working is open to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. To handle men as if they were machinery, binding their freedom by methods and terms, is an offense which God will not tolerate. This work cannot be done without imperiling souls. But too often men seek to harness men and drive them as horses are driven. Right principles are perverted by selfishness and covetousness, which is pronounced by God to be idolatry. It is easy for men who suppose their power to be unlimited to follow the guidance of their own spirit and make propositions and decisions that turn the work out of the straightforward channels in which God designs it shall be traveled, into crooked paths. But because a man is in a position at the heart of the work where he thinks no one should dare say to him, 'Why do you do so wickedly?' he should not seek to rule as Lord over God's heritage." Now, this was exactly the problem that Ellen White faced after 1888. They sent her to Australia because they didn't want to hear her words of counsel, and the leading men at Battle Creek consolidated the work and tried to rule the world. And Ellen White warned over and over about this kingly power lording over God's heritage. And the solution to this is when Ellen White returned in 1901, they completely reorganized the church and broke apart this hierarchy at Battle Creek and set up local unions with more autonomy and power to make their own decisions regarding the publishing work, educational work, and health work, and so forth, the various branches of the work. So we have a similar problem today amongst Davidians. These councils want to rule the world from Waco, Texas, or Mountaindale, and it's abhorrent to the sight of God. So as a result of this controlling power, there are a lot of independent Davidians. And how have they come about? Well, many have scattered about without formal allegiance to any particular group. They often leave or are expelled from existing groups for various reasons. For example, if you dare to question the way things go at one of these groups, sooner or later you're going to be cast out. We've certainly experienced that. Or they get so disgusted with the politics that go on that they leave in frustration. And this is far larger than most people realize. We've talked to dozens of people that are in this position. However, this is not inconsistent with the idea that, one, the 144,000 are largely hidden from view today. Read 5 Testimony, page 81. And two, that they will be born as in a day. Isaiah 66, verse 8. So God has his people in preparation. We may not see many of them today, but they will come forth suddenly. They will be born as in a day. So these people are not forsaken in the sight of God. And they can benefit today from UPA7.org, where they can print their own literature without having to ask permission or depend on corrupted literature published by Salem, Bashan, Mount Dale, or Waco. We don't want to rule over them. They have the freedom to go in their own conscience to advance the Rod message. Or they can also obtain original Rod tract literature from us by helping to cover the expenses. So they're not forsaken. You know, they have a way within their own sphere of influence to advance the shepherd's rod without having to send their tithe to a corrupted ministry. So in our previous presentation, we covered a brief historical timeline for the shepherd's rod. And basically, we had the phase under Old Mount Carmel Center, started in 1930 with Universal Publishing, and then later, Brother Houteff died in 1955. So that period of time, 25 years, was under the direct supervision of the prophet, porter, president, Brother Houteff. However, after Brother Houteff died, we entered into a scattering period, as predicted in Zechariah 13:7. The shepherd will be smitten and the sheep will be scattered. And we diagrammed how many office seekers and usurpers would arise, just as Brother Houteff predicted. For example, Roden's branch, then Florence, usurped and took the association into the ground by 1962, but fortunately God had 100% rod-only Davidians that reorganized to reestablish the original shepherd's rod literature in 1961, and then as we moved along, God had storehouses in California under Brother Warden. 62, Bingham broke off. 1970, the storehouse moved to Salem. 74, it was usurped by Don Adair. But then they relocated back in Yucaipa. And then 1986, a group that had been cast out by Salem, Mount Dale, joined with Yucaipa, continued the original shepherd's rod. 91, a group broke off, led by Norman Archer, to start the new Waco. But God preserved the original until 2006. UPA7.org had to arise to restore the original shepherd's rod, and that continues to this day. We also had another graphic showing the rise and fall of Old Mount Carmel Center from 1930 to 1962. So 1930 started with Universal Publishing. The storehouse moved 1931, and then moved to Waco, Texas in 1935. 1934, the message was completed with 10 symbolic code number 2. Brother Houteff died in 1955, and then Florence, the wife, usurped or took over the leadership, and then in 7 years, by 1962, ran it literally into the ground. But in 1961, God had faithful Davidians to restore the rod back to its original estate. So this rise and fall, we want to juxtapose that with the other graphic to give a better picture of the history of the shepherd's rod from 1930 on into the kingdom. So we have this brief historical timeline that shows a period over on the left, the first Levitical period. And this is started in Los Angeles in 1930 and ended in 1955 with the death of Brother Houteff. At this time, we entered the scattering period, of which the storehouse was restored to publish the original shepherd's rod through locations in California, Salem, Yucaipa, Mountain Dale, and then 2006 UPA7.org arose. And from this point, as the green arrows show, the message, the publication, the storehouses are to go worldwide to reach 20 plus million Seventh-day Adventists. But where's it go from here? Well, eventually we're going to get to Ezekiel 9, and the scattering period will come to a conclusion. And we're going to enter into what we call a second Levitical period. At that time, of course, the kingdom will be established. There'll be the special resurrection, so Brother Houteff, Sister White, the pioneers, will be resurrected to resume their work once again, 7 Testimony, page 17. And then they will preach the loud cry during the kingdom for a period of about 7 years. The 7 last plagues will come, and then the second coming. So we see these 2 Levitical periods. The Leviticus will be restored and put into full operation. And this analysis is parallel with what we actually already see in the shepherd's rod in this chart, the Zechariah 6, the history of the church in the New Testament era from Pentecost to Pentecost, the two brass mountains. So the first Pentecost, the church was united with one accord. They spoke the same thing. They saw eye to eye, and they had great power. The second Pentecost, which is yet future, will manifest even greater power. But in between, we have the valley, the falling away, in which we have the horses and the chariots. So this is a parallel analysis or historical structure that fits the period of the shepherd's rod. From 1930 to 1955, we had a rise, the first Levitical period, and then the scattering from 1955 up until Ezekiel 9, and then after Ezekiel 9, the restoration of Levitical organization, the kingdom established, and we'll have the second brass mountain, the second Pentecost. So it's remarkable how this analysis fits the picture of where we are today and what we can look forward to when the future gospel headquarters is set up in Palestine. So here's some links for further study. Please visit our YouTube channel entitled Universal Publishing Association, where we already have a 6-part series on the history of God's storehouse from Genesis to Revelation, in particular the period of Mount Carmel Center, the period of the scattering time after 1955. We also have several documentaries about the alteration to the original Shepherd's Rod message, but in particular the charts, the golden bowl in Ezekiel 4, also the tampering with the literature. It's very important that we follow and get back and follow the original message and avoid these man-tampered counterfeits that have arisen like a plague since 1955. So we have that well documented. You can also visit our websites, whyparish.org, where we address all the doctrinal controversies amongst Davidians that have arisen since 1955, and also shepherds-rod-speaks.org, where we have a primary focus to plead with Mother to spread the message as the leaves of autumn to every grass in the field throughout Laodicea. And we have basic shepherd rod studies and a lot of history there. So please visit those websites. Now, what's the solution to this? Well, we have corrupted leadership that are trying to rule over and control the work. But by the grace and mercy of God, we can break free from this controlling power and take the work forward. And this is how it works. Through autonomous, which means self-governing, publishing efforts or storehouses. They will publish and teach only the original Shepherd Rod literature and study charts. They will not use or follow man-altered or tampered literature. They will assist in establishing storehouses worldwide to fulfill the commission in 7 Testimony, page 140. We already spelled this out in the previous video that Ellen White said, in essence, in large part through our publishing houses, will be the work of that other angel that comes down from heaven to join the 3 angels and give it power and force. Well, we know that other angel, the 4th angel of Revelation 18, is none other than the Shepherd's Rod message. So it's going to be that which gives power and force, early writings, page 277, to the 3 angels' message when it's repeated. And it will be done largely through publishing houses. The word's plural. That means multiple storehouses to reach Seventh-day Adventists worldwide. It only makes sense. So each storehouse, in essence, is a self-starting enterprise dependent upon God alone for support, and that does not rely on the arm of flesh or the controlling power of corrupted associations. They believe that the next gospel headquarters will be in Palestine, to answer book page 48. So now we're in the scattering time. We can have storehouses all over, and eventually there will be a complete Levitical headquarters in Palestine. So let's move that direction. Furthermore, they believe that the last true porter prophet, Victor Hadaf, was smitten in 1955, and that all the candidates for the 144,000 have to scatter worldwide to hasten the establishment of the kingdom of God and will become the future leaders of the loud cry. Please read 2 Shepherd's Rod, page 265. So how can you be a leader if you're following some other man? You have to lead out in the faith of God and establish a work that to reach our brethren in Laodicea. And what better way to publish the original Shepherd's Rod? It's all within your capability. All you need is a computer, a printer, and some basic tools. Furthermore, we train members to be leaders, not followers, to take up the work that's in front of you and step out in faith. Put your foot in the River Jordan and advance this message and break free from these controlling powers that try to stifle the work, these corrupted leadership hierarchies. Furthermore, God's storehouse will not form a confederacy with the state as IRS 501c3 organizations for financial benefits of their donors so that they can enrich their priest class greedy dog ministers that go around eating up the vineyard according to Ezekiel 47 or Ezekiel chapter 37. Lord have mercy on us. So a simple leadership structure is all that's needed. It can begin with even a single individual. With a laptop, laser printer, and some tools, you can print your own literature. As it grows, basic publishing work can run with as few as 2 people. For example, a publishing committee comprised of a publishing director and a secretary-treasurer as resources come in to manage that work. This pattern has been well illustrated historically, and we'll give an example in a minute here. A trio of like-minded believers can organize and admit new members. This has got adequate precedent in the rise and development of Seventh-day Adventist Church. As the publishing work expands in a particular area, say like the Philippines or Zimbabwe or Nairobi, Kenya, or wherever in the world, new assistants can be assigned to meet specific assignments such as printing, distribution, Bible worker training, evangelism, so forth. And what better way is to bring in people that you get to know them and you prove them. You train them. You find out what they know. You encourage them to read and study. You get them to go through the correspondence course, basic and advanced. You give them assignments to prove them. Just like in the world, if you want to become a skilled tradesman, a journeyman carpenter or a plumber, you start as an apprentice, and then you prove yourself. And then when you prove yourself, you eventually can gain the title of an independent journeyman. It's no different here. We want a fully well-rounded, skilled Bible worker that can give an answer of the reason of the hope that's within him, with meekness and fear, and be skilled in all branches of the work, not just teaching, but also how to garden, how to take care of sick people, how to build things. So, what's the historical precedent? Well, there's plenty. The Seventh-day Adventist Church started with a small band of young adults after 1844. The principal organized leaders were 3 individuals, James White, Ellen White, and Joseph Bates. And this is well established in books chronologing the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The rise of organization took place over a period of years. It didn't happen overnight. They didn't inherit in complete organizational structure. It was built up. For example, the publishing work started in the labors of one man, James White, in 1850, and eventually by 1861, they incorporated and organized, and James handed it over to a committee of people. So the Review and Herald publishing began in 1850 by essentially the labors of one man, James White, and then others came on board to assist. So it was a process. Universal Publishing Association was started by one man, Victor Houteff, and later grew in size as new converts came on board. Now, if you don't know these things, you really should engage in some absolutely essential reading to understand how organization comes about and proper leadership. You don't just inherit something in place. This is a false idea that you're a storehouse all of a sudden because you want to be. No, you have to prove it. You have to do what a storehouse does, which is publish the original Shepherd's Rod. So here's some great documentation. This one, the Documents on Church Organization, 1883 to 1907. It's found at the Office of Archives and Statistics, General Conference, Seventh-day Adventist, published in 1984. You can download the document there. We'll publish a blog post and have a link to this. But a great document that details how the church came about in developing organization of all the branches. There's an excellent paper called The Publishing Department by James White, Review and Herald, May 23, 1861. You can also find this in Life Sketches, pages 347 to 357. James wrote and published a great deal because the early Adventists were very suspicious of organization. They considered it part of Babylon since they left the churches of Babylon prior to 1844. So it took a while to persuade the divine order of organization, gospel order, as Ellen White called it. So James White was the man that almost single-handedly did this through publications in Review and Herald. Here's another paper called Leadership, published December 1874. And another paper, Organization and Discipline, Review and Herald, January 4, 1881. Essential reading to understand these principles. In this book, The Second Great Advent Movement, Its Rise and Progress by J. N. Lothborough, 1905 edition. You can still buy this from ABC's or eBay. It's readily available online. J. N. Lothborough was a pioneer that was probably the most closely associated with James and Ellen White, so he witnessed this firsthand. Excellent. It's an imperative reading to understand organization and leadership. So, how do you become a leader? Interesting question. Well, one of the best ways is to read the life stories and biographies of great men that God has used in the past to lead in his movement, like Abraham, Moses, Paul, John Huss, Martin Luther, John Knox, William Miller, Joseph Bates, James White, J.N. Andrews, just to name a few. They're excellent books and resources that I encourage you to get a copy and read these stories. Wonderful object lessons for us, and will reflect the type of man that God wants you to be if you're ever going to be a leader in his movement. And ladies, no, God hasn't left out women. They have a very important role. For example, Ellen White, or how about Harriet Beecher Stowe? You may not know her, but she was a prominent leader for abolition in the early 1800s in this country, and she was a very influential person behind Abraham Lincoln that eventually led to the abolition of slavery in the United States. So it took the counsel and the persistence of a God-fearing woman to influence the leader of the United States. So hers is a great testimony. She lived in Connecticut. Or Fanny Crosby, the famous hymnist. There are lots of examples of God-fearing women as examples of taking up roles in the work that God has appointed for them. So study these, and then get your house in order. A man is not fit to lead in anything unless his own house is in order. Are your children in order and obedient and disciplined? If not, you're not fit to do anything in the work of God. So get your house in order. Be humble and listen to wise counsel. Abraham Lincoln, one of the great American presidents, was humble enough to listen to a woman and act upon it and lead to the emancipation of the black man from the cruel bondage of slavery. So we could follow that example ourselves. It's one thing about the Davidian associations. They're not humble. They don't listen to any kind of counsel. People try to witness to them and plead with them, and that they're proud, they're arrogant, they want to rule and control the work. They don't want to progress. So the only thing to do is to leave them alone and go forward as God would show you. So take up the work that sits right in front of you. You don't have to ask permission or wait on anybody. There's clearly things to do. Start a website, publish the tracts, go to camp meetings, visit churches, get names and addresses, give Bible studies. There's plenty to do. And mind your own business. If you keep to this work, you'll have plenty to do, and stay out of other people's business and avoid this plague of gossip about what other people are doing. And face life's challenges like a man that fears God. Yes, life is rough. You know, the world is a cruel place. So stop complaining and whining and justifying. Get busy and take up your cross and follow Christ. Don't retreat. Never give up. The devil's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. We're going to meet him on the ground face to face, but don't give up. Trust God. Have fear of God and claim his promises. And don't give up. And take up your cross and follow Christ. That's what we're called to do. Take this burden, get on your knees, plead with God to give you strength and courage and vision to take this message forward so that we can hasten that long hoped for kingdom of glory. May God bless you as you search for truth as for hidden treasure. This concludes our study. Thank you for your time, for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us anytime. We're upa7.org. Our email, upa5453@gmail.com. Telephone, 860-798-3672. Or better yet, visit our website, yparish.org. Or leave a comment below this video. And better yet, subscribe if you are challenged by these presentations. Enjoy them. Subscribe, because we have many more coming. We are serious about advancing this message, and we will not be discouraged by any contradictions. We're going to go forward, so please, let's get this kingdom to come. May God bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure, and to cease ye from man whose breath is in his nostrils. Godspeed.